Have you ever noticed how some moments feel extra special while others just sort of blend into the background of your life? Things like the school bell ringing at the end of the day, or blowing out birthday candles, or even something as simple as a handshake after a deal. These are rituals, little traditions that mark important moments in our lives. But it's more than that. There's something about that tiny ritual that makes us feel something. I used to be a ritual rebel. I still kind of am, if I'm not the one who came up with the ritual. I've questioned everything, from wedding traditions to holiday traditions, to why we're even still celebrating certain holidays that we now know was just a massacre of some sort. But the older I get, or maybe it's not age, I think it's the more intentional I become in my life, the more I rely on rituals. In the morning, during transitions, for closure, for creation, for calling in. But here's what I've learned. It's not the ritual itself that matters. It's the meaning we pour into it. And this is important because rituals are like a double-edged sword. They can make us feel rooted and connected, but that only works if we actively participate in their meaning, not just mindlessly going through the motions. And rituals are everywhere. In cultures, families, in our individual lives. They can be big things like a graduation ceremony or a funeral, or little things like family dinners or a secret handshake with your partner. But rituals are about more than just tradition. They help us mark our progress and feel grounded in a crazy world. If we ignore the power of rituals, we might lose touch with who we are. They reflect our choices and they remind us who we are and who we want to be. They're like a compass pointing us in the right direction. However, rituals can also become a burden if we're too rigid about them. So the key is to find balance. Create your own unique mix of routines and spontaneous moments that tell your story, and craft your life. Every little ritual, even the ones we barely notice, shapes who we are. And we're about to explore the power of rituals with expert Mike Norton. We'll learn how these everyday practices can bring us clarity, strength, and connection. Even the most ordinary moments can be magical if we embrace them. So get excited to discover just how transformative your daily rituals can be. 3 key things we will learn are how to distinguish between what's habitual and what's transformative, how adding your unique signature to age-old rituals can transform your life's most important moments, and why the tiniest rituals can make the biggest difference in your love life. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Let's be real about something. Workplace stress is not just part of the job anymore. 61% of people are dealing with stress levels that are way beyond normal, and it is not sustainable. I used to think that grinding through stress was some kind of badge of honor. Push harder, sleep less, ignore what your body was telling you. And it nearly broke me when I was working for startups. And look, maybe that voice in your head telling you to make a change is right. Maybe you do need to quit your job or completely flip your life. But whether you're making big moves or just trying to survive your current situation, you need tools to handle it well. And that's where therapy comes in. Modern therapy teaches you how to set boundaries without the guilt, how to trust your intuition instead of second-guessing yourself constantly, how to make better decisions from a place of clarity instead of chaos. And BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform with over 30,000 therapists. They've got a 4.9 rating from 1.7 million reviews because it actually works. You can talk to someone from anywhere, and you can switch therapists anytime if it's not the right fit. A vacation won't fix chronic stress, but the right support can help you navigate whatever comes next. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Unwind from work with BetterHelp. My listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/mindlove. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/mindlove. Can we talk about back to school chaos for a second? The kids are getting back into routines, everyone's schedules are crazy, and suddenly you're supposed to have dinner on the table every night like some kind of magician. But want to know what I figured out? Shopping, planning, and cooking food really can be simple and stress-free, which is why I love Hungry Root. Hungry Root takes the stress out of mealtime by filling your cart with personalized picks and planning your week of meals, getting smarter with every order. With over 15,000 recipes to choose from each week, many ready in just 15 minutes or less, it's a huge lifesaver on those busy weeknights. I personally love their smart cart technology. It learns what I actually like and then recommends groceries, recipes, and supplements tailored to my tastes and needs. Plus, I love the kids' snack section where I get these really easy snacks to just keep in the car or throw in our to-go bags or lunch boxes for those of you who need them. They screen out over 200 additives, including high fructose corn syrup and artificial sweeteners. They only source high-quality meat and seafood with no hormones or antibiotics, and they carry trusted brands like Oatly and Vital Farms. The time that I have gotten back has been incredible. Take advantage of this exclusive offer. For a limited time, get 40% off your first box, plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/mindlove and use code MINDLOVE. That's hungryroot.com/mindlove, code MINDLOVE to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/mindlove, code MINDLOVE.
It would be really nice if we could, if we just said, calm down, and we could just snap and now we're calm. Or, don't be sad, and we could just snap and we're not sad anymore. But we're not built that way. We have to do things to get in the right emotional state. And I think one of the things that can happen with anxiety as an example is we do tell ourselves to calm down. We say to ourselves, this isn't a big deal, calm down. But that doesn't work. And so now we're anxious about not just that we can't calm down, but that we told ourselves to calm down. And now we're failing at that also. So it really starts to spiral out of control for us. And one of the things that researchers have suggested rituals do is, because it requires us to pay attention to something, it actually it doesn't allow us to spiral as far.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
You wrote a book all on rituals. As I was telling you, this is very timely for me. What inspired your research into this particular topic?
I was looking around. So I'm a social psychologist by training, and my whole job is basically to just stare at stuff and see what's going on. And at some point, about a decade ago, I started noticing rituals were kind of all over the place. So, you have like weddings and funerals and those kinds of rituals, but also, athletes were doing these funny things before they served a tennis ball or hit a baseball. People were doing these funny things like psyching themselves up before games and before meetings. And so I really, families have these traditions that they do. I really started to see these little practices kind of all over the place throughout our lives. And that's what got me interested, was not just in some domain of life we're doing these sorts of things, but it seems like humans love to do them across everything in our lives. And that I really wanted to dive into and see what's really going on. Why do we do it so much?
Yeah, I have little rituals for things, and it's almost dangerous territory for me because once I define a ritual, it feels very off to break. And so I've had to, I'm a Taurus, and I'm not super attached to astrology, but I have found when I get deep readings on it, like the natal chart readings and things like that, it goes a lot deeper than just reading your horoscope in the back of a magazine, if people still do that, because it's 2023 on an app, I should say. And I'm always like, wow, that is so like me. But it says that Tauruses are all about routines and things like that. And growing up, I didn't see that in myself. But I think it was just because I didn't really have a strong sense of self. And now that I do, I am so about my rituals, my morning routines. But they really help me thrive in one way where I'm like, okay, now I can get all of this stuff done. I feel great in the morning, whatever it is. But then I started to realize I would travel and I would need to bring so much to bring my ritual. Yeah. So it's this balance of loving the ritual when it's there, but also not being so attached that it keeps me away from new experiences and mixing things up. So that was just my first reflection around the idea of rituals. But when you started looking into it, what did you start to see? Did it change your definition of what you thought a ritual was when you started really just bringing awareness to it?
It's so interesting because the facet that you highlight, which is it's almost like they have reward but risk, I think is it isn't just the case that the more rituals you add, the happier you are. It's unfortunately it's not that simple. They do come with, I think, risks actually. And so we do see people who have their morning routine or their bedtime routine or their pre-meeting routine that's a little bit ritualistic. And they say, my gosh, I feel really, really good when I do it my way. It's the right way. I've been doing it for years. I feel ready to go. I feel prepared. But as you said, that means that we're a little bit stuck with it. So, if you have a morning routine and suddenly you have kids, well, they don't care about your morning order of things. You know what I mean? They want the toothpaste, they want the toothpaste. And so you do have this funny thing where they can be really helpful for us. And also they do come with some risk because we do get a little bit attached to them. And that I think was something that I had thought a little bit about, but not enough about maybe. So as I started to do the research, they're not just good. They're clearly not just bad, but what they always do is they provoke emotions in us. Sometimes that's a very positive, like a wedding's very positive emotion. Sometimes it's not, like a funeral is a ritual with some very negative, sad emotions. So we don't just use them to smile, we use them across all these different emotional needs in our lives.
That's so funny that you bring that up. We have a 3-year-old and he is very 3 at the moment. And every morning my husband will make us warm lemon water. So that's how we start our day. And he was still drinking his. My toddler's going through a phase. He loves filling up cups in our water filter. Just and so he's constantly looking for cups and he'll dump some out. And we're like, stop wasting the water. And he was just insistent that my husband dumps out his lemon water. And he almost did. And I was like, don't do that. We're not going to feed into that need and show him that's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so it's that ritual has evolved for us where it used to be something that I was sort of stuck into. Now I'm like, well, we need a base structure because everything else is going to be chaos.
Exactly.
So we have the same thing for breakfast every morning, the same lemon water, the same order of things, but you just never know what tiny tyrant is going to come around knocking over our cups or whatever. It's just so funny.
It's funny because sometimes people will say, I don't have any rituals. I'm not that kind of I'm not a new agey millennial or whatever stereotypes we have about that. And then I ask them if they have kids. And if they say yes, I say, well, when you brought your kid home from I have an 8-year-old daughter. When you brought your kid home from the hospital, what was that like? And they say, well, it was terrifying. This is a human, take care of this human forever. It's pretty stressful. But I said, well, what'd you start to do when the baby needed to sleep? And they'd say, now that I think about it, we would do this song and then this stuffed animal and then this book, and then we'd have to take the bath, and then after the bath we'd have to put this specific onesie on, and then we do this book, this song, and this book, and this song, and these 4 stuffed animals, and then there's the bed. And as they were saying it, they said, oh my God, I've been doing a ritual, right? Parents turn to, we weren't thinking of it as a ritual, we were just trying to get through life basically, but we actually bring it to bear, right? We say, I'm really stressed, the baby needs to sleep, and we just comes out of us, let's do the same thing every single night and see if that happens to help. So anyone who says, I don't have any rituals, if you really look at your life, we turn to them for lots of different needs that we might have.
It's true. I always thought I rebelled against rituals. Like our wedding was different. I didn't like the ritual of a father giving away a bride, and I lost my dad anyways, so I think I had an extra resistance to that. But I did invite my stepdad to be the officiant. I had my grandma be my flower girl. I just, there's a lot of little things that I was just like, why isn't anyone questioning this? And so I just did it differently. But then when it comes to the rituals I craft, it's like those are made of steel. I don't want anyone to knock those over. Like I said, I'm really trying to get better with them and be like, okay, I don't need to bring every supplement and my functional mushrooms and monk fruit and all the things that I put in my coffee. I can have a normal, basic Keurig coffee when I'm somewhere else. But I'm wondering, even for someone like me who really thought I didn't like rituals, and now I think I might like them more than the average person, as you mentioned, whether or not we recognize that we have them, we all tend to somehow pop up with a ritual in our lives, whether it's Steve Jobs wearing the same shirt every single day so he doesn't have to think about it, my exact same breakfast every day, baby sleep routines. Why are they so important to us?
One of the things that historically, if you look at when humans use rituals, they, again, so many different situations we use them, but an underlying theme is often that they give us a sense of control. So if you think about, I mean, the older you get, the more you realize that you're not in control of anything. We try to convince ourselves, but in the end, it's just chaos. But especially with a kid, it's totally chaos. And there's a lot of uncertainty. And what are you going to do with that feeling? And one thing that we do, I think, is turn to rituals because they're familiar, they're repeated. We've been doing them for years. Our family's been doing them for years. Members of my faith have been doing this for thousands of years. There's a real regularity and sense of certainty and control in rituals that I think we use sometimes to cope with the madness of life that's just coming at us from all directions all the time. So there's something in there, I think, about, we try to get control in many different ways in our lives for sure. But I think rituals are one of the ways that we try to get a little sense of it back.
It's interesting too how we view them. Like certain rituals, people would be like, oh, that's witchcraft. But then other ones we just accept as totally normal. Like the ones you mentioned, athletes before a sporting event, they'll be like slapping their heel and doing a little jig and they're dead serious about it. And everyone's just like, oh, just let him be. This is going to help us win. And I'm like, if I did that before every interview, I mean, maybe people would accept it. I don't know. Or I just read some meme on an account that said like something like Christians don't do witchcraft. Also Christians, let's celebrate the blood of something on the first solstice after the first full moon after the spring equinox. And I was like, we all have them. We're just defining them differently. And that brings me to the question, what's the difference between a tradition and a ritual? What's the difference between a tradition and a ritual?
I think they often overlap. So even if you think of your example of a wedding, so if you ask people what's a wedding, things come to mind. There's if you think of like the Christian wedding in the United States, let's start there, even though they're very different all over the world. But immediately it's like, well, there's an aisle, there's people sitting down, someone's at the front officiating, people are dressed up. The bride's wearing white or at least some kind of outfit that she wouldn't usually wear, so we have these sort of, this is what's happening at a wedding, and we receive those traditions. There's no need to have a wedding, you know what I mean? It's you already love the person, you're going to spend your life with them, but we have these traditions that we bring to bear. But then we don't just follow the script, right? So we have our own little rituals, our own little tweaks. You said, there's some elements of it that I like, and a lot of them I'm going to do completely differently. I talked to a couple last week, and they said the main thing they wanted to change, their family said, you have to do it the traditional way. You get a lot of pressure from the families to do it. And they said, to humor them, we said, fine, we'll do it the traditional way, except they demanded to have AC/DC playing when they came down the aisle. That was their number one. And, there's no 2,000-year-old text that says, play AC/DC at your wedding. They weren't even around 2,000 years ago. But we decide, no, this is our ritual. We'll use tradition for sure because it's really meaningful, and we're going to make it ours. We're going to craft it ourselves so it has special meaning for us.
I like that. Yeah. And sometimes I am not good. The moment that somebody says, you have to do it this way, I could have really wanted to do it that way. And I'd be like, oh, absolutely not. Everything's going to be different now. And I kind of did that. I wasn't going to have a wedding at all, but instead of a cake, I'm just like, why is everything so defined? Like, now we both hold the knife, we cut this cake that nobody really likes the flavor of, and then let's put it in your face and everyone laughs, even though we've seen it in a million other weddings. It's not funny. You just paid $200 to get your makeup done. Every part of it, I just am like, no. And so we had weed brownies and dessert shots instead. Just funny, I don't drink anymore, but that's what we did. And we forgot to tell one of our groomsmen and his wife, and they don't partake in any of that. And so they just saw brownies and ate them, and they missed our wedding photos. It's like a whole thing. They're like, I don't think we can show up. Stace is really, it was not my best work, but
Amazing story though. Amazing story. So
but it reminds me of how, like for me, I could see how a big part of my identity was coming out there. And it was in my identity of not fitting into a box. And so I was very pushing against the rituals. But then there's the other ones, like my morning routine. I did have to kind of grieve parts of my morning routine. I still do try to do it, but it ebbs and flows. I went through like 2 years of having the exact morning routine, then had a newborn, lost it all, got it back for a while when my baby was old enough to have daddy take him. But I realized I was actually causing myself more stress than good trying to stick to the same thing. And so I had to figure out, how do I have a ritual where the ritual is more about some sort of focused me time, grounding, distraction free, rather than this is exactly what I do. So it's more like, even like my work day of time blocking. It's like, okay, well, Tuesdays from 1 to 3, I'm doing admin tasks. It's not the exact same thing, but it's in the list that I have that's titled that. But you talk about how our identity is impacted by our rituals and how they can even help us transition from one to the other. And that's why I was thinking of that sort of transition of like motherhood. But I don't think my transition was super graceful. So I'm wondering, how did you find that they're effective in helping that transition?
it is so funny that so another thing, if people say, I don't have any rituals, not a ritual person, you can ask the questions like, have you ever one day decided to put on a long robe and wear a hat that has a square on top of it with a tassel on it and walk across the stage and shake hands and take a scroll of paper and you just keep going down the list. And like, oh yeah, no, of course I did graduation. You say, well, what's a pretty weird, you already passed the test. There's no reason to put the hat on. So we absolutely turn to them in moments in life where we say, you're done with being that person and now you're this person. Nearly every culture has a ritual between roughly the ages of 12 and 16, where kids go from being kids to being an adult, to being like a fully formed member of the community. And it everywhere, you can think whatever your faith is, whatever your culture is, exactly what it is for that one. So we do use them at these moments of transition. And it does seem like it's a marker to say, we could just say, I'm different. But for some reason, we use these things. We gather everyone around us so they can watch us commit to being this new person. And we use it kind of to help us along our way on these transitions. But, as you said, if you get stuck in them, then that's not going to help you with your goal, right? So we usually use rituals. We're doing it in the service of getting something else done in a way. Like you're doing your morning routine to feel calm so that you can have a good day. But what can happen with rituals is sometimes you get kind of lost in the ritual itself. So if for these athletes who do these crazy things before they serve, if they just kept doing the crazy things, they would lose. You got to stop and do the thing. So we engage in these rituals to try to get something else out of it. And as soon as they start to be, no, I just need to do the ritual to do the ritual. Well, now we've lost the link between why we were doing it in the first place. And that's when we might start to say, think about pulling it back a little bit. It seems to be interfering instead of helping.
Yeah, maybe that's why I didn't feel like a full-blown adult until I got married. I never had a sweet 16. We don't have the quinceañera and things like that, or the bat mitzvah. And so I was just still, I felt like 14 years old until I was like 29.
Yeah. Once,
I needed a ritual.
If you look down at your hand and there's a ring on literally the finger is called the ring finger. Like we named the whole finger after the specific thing, which is a wedding ring. And you look down and you've got a ring on it. You're not a kid. You know what I mean? Like you're not 5. You're not 5 because you're married now. So we actually do use rituals to say, I'm not that anymore. I'm this. And we even use like physical evidence to be able to say, no, I'm not that. I'm something new.
Oh, wow. And then if you really consider, there's some people who have no desire or plans to get married, and they still have this ring finger. Is it just meant to look down and think failure? Like you're not living up to society's expectations.
Exactly. Or after a divorce, you have the tan line where the ring was. I mean, it's very painful, really.
It's like you might feel fine, but you have a whole finger that's not living up to its purpose.
Its only purpose.
I know. You write about ritual signatures. What do you mean by that?
I think relating to the idea of your question about traditions versus rituals, I think that traditions often come to us fully formed. Sometimes, like you, we react against them. Sometimes we say, no, that one works for me. I'll take that on. But also we do our own tweaks on things. So we make it ours, even in the context of a wedding. Yes, it's a tradition, but I make it mine. And when we make our rituals our own, or most people have some kind of morning routine, and it very often involves coffee or tea in some order, or taking a shower and brushing your teeth. It's the same elements, but I do it my way at my time in my order. And that's what I mean by your ritual signature. It's kind of we're all going to brush our teeth in the morning. It's not that. It's that when I do it and how I do it, that starts to be a little bit of who I am. And you can think about it in families as well, or in your romantic relationships. The way that yes, there's Valentine's Day, for example, but the way that we do Valentine's Day is like this. And that means it's our ritual signature, not just a tradition that we're enacting without really making it personal.
I have a lot of ritual signatures. I feel like it takes me more effort to defy the traditional. Like my whole family is really concerned that we're not doing Santa and the Easter Bunny. Like they're very concerned. Are you sure? You're taking away a lot of magic. And I was like, we have different experiences there. I have a very core memory of learning that Santa wasn't real. And I swear, I don't think I ever trusted my mom in the same way again. I was just like, you lied to me my whole life.
Yeah.
But it might be because I literally argued when I was, what grade was that? I think I was in kindergarten, and I argued with a first grader at a new school. I didn't have any friends. So I was sitting at this table with all first graders, and he's talking about how he found out his dad was Santa. And I stood up at a new school and was like, you don't know what you're talking about. Santa just doesn't come because you don't believe. So your dad has to do this. And I was like, this is how I spent my first week in a brand new school in a new town.
Fighting.
And the moment I found out, it's like the blood rushed out of my body. And I was like, I made a fool of myself 2 years ago.
and you made me make a fool of myself. What kind of a parent would you?
So I see both sides on that one. I know there's a lot of magic in it, but just for us, we're trying something new. What does it look like if we don't lie to our kids? I say, as I also am Mr. Dump Truck says you need to brush your teeth. So I don't know. I might just be a total hypocrite.
Yeah. It is funny. We encourage our kids so much to enter pretend worlds. And we loved entering. I mean, we get to be kids again because we get to enter in the world also with just like a stick. All we need is a stick. And now we're off in this other world. But then sometimes we say no, not that kind of pretend. This kind is okay, but I don't like this other kind. So it's very fun. Pretending is, in a sense, lying is too strong a word, but it isn't real. It's just so interesting and fun to pretend. And I think if you think of something like the Easter Bunny like that, then it can be kind of a fun pretend thing. But it sounds like in your experience, it got to be too much, too insistent, that the thing was real, and that maybe was a line too far.
Yeah. And I think we're all just meant to follow our guidance. So I would never bash another parent and say, well, all these parents are lying to their kids. But that was how I internalized it. And I feel like I had that experience for a reason. Maybe for some reason, I'm supposed to do something differently because I have this adverse reaction to this way. And other people, it was the best time of their life. So yes, definitely carry that on. But I'm going to just follow my inner guidance. I follow those arrows now. We're going to do something a little bit different. But that's not to say that I'm not going to figure out how to create different types of rituals for my family where I do really want to prioritize that magic. And so I'm trying to figure out, how do I do that without what I consider to be a lie and a deception of raising me in a certain way? I think it also really impacted me because I was in a blended family. So my stepdad came in and there was a number of steps of feeling this disconnect with my mom. I was raised Christian, and there was this time where she was like, well, God comes first, marriage comes second, children come third. And I don't know why she told me this at the age of 7, but I remember just being like, oh, So I'm down here. I just got demoted. It was me and you against the world. And so then it was like this extra thing. Now I found out she and he were lying to me. And I was just like, oh, I'm just a pawn in their life. Like, do whatever you want to me. And so what we plan to do with the rituals is I really want to add that magic into our spiritual beliefs, because I feel like when I learned that Santa and Easter Bunny weren't real, the magic was just dead. And when I started to really connect to my own version of spiritual beliefs later on and understand the way the world works and the divine force that's within everything, it was very hard for me to wholeheartedly believe, because there was this moment at a core foundational development time of that being cut off. And so I want to see what happens with this new way of doing that. And I know that you talk about this sort of emotional connection to our rituals. And I'm hoping that doing it in this more intentional way for us can keep that emotion, because I also know emotions are the drivers of our behavior. That's what we learned in both Atomic Habits and Start With Why, both talking about that our emotional brain, the limbic brain, is what drives our behavior. And we're also often trying to do it with the logic side. So I'm curious, when you think about that, reminds me of the whole habit thing with Atomic Habits, the emotion, the ritual behind it. How do you differentiate between a ritual and just a habit we're trying to create? Or can it be one and the same? How do you differentiate between a ritual and just a habit we're trying to create? Or can it be one and the same?
It's tricky. So what's interesting is that two people can be doing the exact same thing. And for one of them, it's a boring, dry habit that they just have to get done. And for the other person, it's like a deeply meaningful ritual. So even if you think about if you were to observe a religious service, I'm Catholic, so I know the standing and kneeling and sitting pattern for Catholic Mass. And if you observe, everyone's moving at the same time and saying the same words. So each person is engaged in the ritual. But some of the people there, it's a deep expression of their faith. It's connecting them to past generations. It's connecting them to their spirituality. And other people are there because their parents made them go. And it's doing nothing for them. But if I'm observing, I can't tell who's who until I ask them, hey, these actions that you're doing, are these really meaningful for you? Or are you we have this phrase, going through the motions. Literally, we have a phrase for it. And for some people, they're going through the motions. And for others, it's become something more than that. And even with like a morning routine, for some people, it's literally just a checklist. They don't care what order they do it in. Nothing matters. They just have to get this stuff done. And for other people, it's, no, I have to do newspaper and then coffee and then walk the dog. And then they have this orderliness to it, this pattern to it that provokes emotion. And that's when we start to see something is not just a habit, which is kind of the behavior itself. It's a little bit dry. Rituals are a little bit more emotional, meaningful. We get more out of them. But really, one of the only ways to know is to ask people, hey, when you were doing that thing earlier, was that important to you? Like, do you care if you do it in that order or not? And some people say, no, I don't care at all. And other people say, yeah, I can't switch the order. I have to do it in this way or I'll feel like weird all day. So that is a little bit like sometimes the word ritual, you think of like people in robes, with candles chanting and things like that. I don't mean that end of the ritual continuum, but this difference down here between, are you just going through the motions or are you imbuing them with something more than that? And when you are, I think it's moving toward more ritualistic.
For some reason, I'm just reminded of like a show I saw like 15 years ago around people with really extreme cases of OCD, and they've got to like flip the light switch on and off 17 times before they go to bed. It's like sometimes this ritual, and like you said, I'm just reminded with that phrase, well, if I don't do it in this order, I feel off. It's like, What? Are you creating your own OCD sometimes? The church I grew up in, I don't know why, but we spent a lot of time. They had like defend your faith seminars. We spent a lot of time really learning why ours was the only way and everything else was wrong. And it's funny that you bring up the rituals around Catholicism, because that was something that we learned was well, why would you just repeat the same words every time? You completely lack a connection with God. And it was like, and it's funny because I thought about that years later when I was developing my own morning rituals that made me feel really good. And I was trying to figure out why I had this like subconscious resistance against going through specific motions. And I had to consciously reverse that so that I could connect, because it ended up being so helpful for me. And it ended up grouping together, habit stacking, really, a bunch of behaviors that I knew would make me feel good, but I had to kind of create my own ritual. And I even love to like light a candle and have stuff like that. And it feels really good.
Yeah. And, I think it's really important to think about one of the things that rituals do really well is they bring us together, religious rituals, but all kinds of rituals, family rituals as well. But they can also divide us, because if our way of doing it is the right way, then other people's way is the wrong way. And that means we get both connection, beautiful, wonderful, meaningful connection with people, but we have to make sure that it's not, when we do it, it feels good. If it starts to feel right, that's when we can start to have, well, then therefore they must be wrong. And we do see that in our research, that they do both things. They can bring us together and heighten differences between groups.
That is such an important distinction. I think that is why I do feel so good in my adult life, just having a more broad sense of spirituality, because for some reason we kept learning how things were right and wrong. And because some things didn't sit with me or didn't have specific meaning for me, inside I was internalizing that as I was wrong. And in the same way, that it's like that same energy followed through when I was having a morning routine that was really special to me. And then I would break it for some reason, and I would feel like something's wrong. And what I've really had to learn, really to harness my own inner peace, is being okay with the ebbs and flows of things and being like, oh, that was awesome that I got a 2-hour morning routine for a whole 2 months. And now it's 3 minutes. But whatever, I have some time for myself. And when I have a 3-minute morning routine, I'm going to instill some extra time and go on a long walk with an audiobook, something like that.
Nope.
And just being okay with the shift and not creating meaning around it for either myself or for somebody else. Because like I mentioned, that meme that just I thought was funny was around like you can look at a different religion and be like, oh, that's witchcraft or blasphemy or whatever words your way of thought thinks of it. But at the same time, you probably have plenty of things in your life that they could do that exact same thing to. Like, when is it witchcraft versus you're still lighting a candle? You're still doing something representative of blood and body. You're still doing it on the first full moon after the spring equinox, like whatever. Like, it has all of the exact ingredients. You're just labeling it differently, and you think it's because it's a different god or something like that. So that's what makes it witchcraft. But my point is, we are creating meaning for ourselves with these rituals, but in doing so, we're creating meaning about a different way, whether that's a different way of you moving into somebody else doing it. And that's when it really starts to divide.
People say, if you think back to the first time when you were younger, when you went to either a friend or a significant other's house for Thanksgiving, and the number one reaction people have is, these people are doing it wrong.
This lovely family invited me in to share a meal.
No, it's like, what kind of a family eats at 4:00 instead of the time that we grew up eating? Or why do they have that kind of pie instead of that kind of pie? And it really does feel wrong. I mean, you really feel like, well, these people must be crazy. They're doing Thanksgiving wrong. But of course, if they came to our house, they'd say, you're doing it wrong, right? So we very quickly have this thing like, no, our way is a really great way. And your way, maybe you should kind of shift it around, something like that. And blended families see this, to your earlier point, because they have to bring them together. They have to bring them together. And that can lead to all kinds of conflict between families, but also sometimes really lovely outcomes where the rituals themselves get blended also and become the ritual of the new family. But that process is typically not easy to get there.
We've talked a lot about the overlap and the differentiations between things like traditions, rituals, habits. But another thing that you share about is how certain characteristics of a ritual can actually influence how effective it is. What did you learn about that?
One of the things we see is it's funny. So repeating a ritual over time, people tend to say it has more emotional resonance. So if my family has been doing Thanksgiving this way for 3 generations back every single time, then I do feel that it has really, really deep meaning to me. So there is something about regular practice that people feel it changes the meaning of the ritual and deepens it. Yet at the same time, there's plenty of rituals that only happen one time that are very meaningful to us as well. Like most of us don't make a huge habit out of getting married. We don't try to get married every morning at 6
Some of
a.m.
us do.
Yeah. And so, we're doing some one-off kinds of rituals, I think. So it's not that they have to be repeated in order to have meaning, but we do see sometimes that things like repetition can deepen the meaning.
I can also see how that sort of collectivism. I'm thinking of, I was going through a breakup years and years ago, and it was just a really hard one. I think it's because it was my first healthy relationship that was breaking up, whereas the other ones, it was very clear. It actually
that's harder.
Should have ended at the first red flag instead of the 80th. And this one really highlighted for me where my relationship patterns were wrong. I was really used to the emotional ups and downs and the highs of the ups and then the deep lows and the apologies. And so I was kind of creating that in this. I can admit that. I was picking fights where I shouldn't have. We weren't right for each other anyways, but yeah, that was difficult for me because I made a lot of meaning about me. This was the first time it might have been really spurred by me and our differences rather than just somebody cheating on me and me dealing with it, or whatever it was. And it was months later and a friend was like, okay, we're going to do something. And I was like, what? And we actually did the burning thing. I wrote down things and we burnt it. And it felt so helpful. I just went on a women's retreat where we did that same thing of letting things go. And I like to do it at the end of the year. And it feels like it's funneling the energy towards something. I can get closure. Actually, the last episode I just did was all about this idea of closure and how to create it for ourselves, because so often we're waiting for closure and we need to figure out ways to embrace imperfect closure. So this is a really good sort of lead into that. So maybe it also has to do with maybe the ones that only happen once are powerful because a bunch of people do them all over the world. But the ones that are just for us need to be repeated over time. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think we're flexible in which type we use, which I find very interesting. Sometimes we pull on the one that everyone's doing, and sometimes we say, let me do my own. But breakup rituals, by the way, are among the most entertaining because people do sometimes I'll tell us, someone in one of our studies talked about how they took all the pictures of them, took them to the park where they shared their first kiss, tore them into pieces, and then burned them by the tree where they had their first kiss. And an audience will start to laugh, and then I'll say, just take a second and think if you've ever done anything like that. And most people are like, yeah. Maybe not burning, but some kind of thing to get over the person. A lot of us have been there anyway.
Yeah, the people who burn are psychopaths. I prefer to take a needle through the eyes. Just kidding. Just an example of how we tend to think our way is less weird than other people when change starts and not. We mentioned the sports rituals and how those are really common. And I'm curious what you found on if they actually impact performance, or can it get in the way? What if a ball rolls under your foot while you're doing your happy dance right before the thing? And it's does it leave too much room for outside influences to get in the way? When is it good and when is it bad?
There's a study that I really love about baseball players. So they videotape baseball players and then they code every single movement that they make before they're going to be at bat, before every swing actually. And in this particular study, the average is 83 movements. So they're, if you think of what baseball, the batting gloves and the whole thing, right? So 83 movements. But there's a range. Of course, not everybody does exactly 83. Some people do many fewer, some people do many more. And you do hear stories from scouts where they'll say this person's pre-at-bat ritual, it's so elaborate now that it's not actually getting them in the right headspace. It's getting them wrapped up in the ritual. And so it is a case where, again, if you're doing too much ritual, that's not going to be the thing that kind of settles you and makes you feel like you're ready to perform. It actually can get in the way. I taught a freshman class, and I had a student, a very really good athlete, who said, Well, what I do is I make my pregame rituals so elaborate that if I don't perform well, I can think back and say, well, I probably did something wrong in the ritual. It's the ritual's fault. Which is an amazing way to think about the problem. But you can see how what is too elaborate, what is not elaborate enough, what are we using them to try to get in the right frame of mind for?
Years and years ago, I did an episode on with a hypnotist, and he was talking about just different ways of infusing NLP, neuro linguistic programming, to actually improve performance. And there's just these little things where he talked about doing where you can set your own like focus habit. And I did this for a while. Actually, when I was getting off of Adderall, I was having a very difficult time focusing. That was a huge ritual that also had a lot of chemical effects. Mm-hmm. But it was like without taking that thing, I felt I was immediately projecting how my day was going to be, because I did feel awful for like 90 days after getting off of it. And actually for a couple of years, because I was just like, I had to get used to a new baseline of energy.
Yeah.
Nothing's ever going to match taking 50 milligrams of Adderall a day. And so he taught me about how you can have like a specific scent, whether it's a candle, essential oil, maybe a song that you play. But there's even another thing around like a pressure point. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be something specific. You can like squeeze your fingers together and it can stimulate, basically like create a process and a neural pathway where you're like, oh, and then you get into focus a lot easier. And I swear that worked so well for me for a while. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that? Could it actually have been doing something in my brain? There's also a lot of power to the placebo effect, which I'm totally fine with. If it has like a 60% improvement rate, then I'm going to go all into the... People like to discount the placebo, but doesn't it really just mean the power of the mind and the power of belief? I think it's magnificent. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think when you think about trying to calm down for, you're nervous about something and you're trying to calm down, and we aren't unfortunately built where we can just tell ourselves to feel a certain way and then we feel that way. It would be really nice if we could, if we just said calm down and we could just snap and now we're calm, or don't be sad and we could just snap and we're not sad anymore. But we're not built that way. We have to do things to get in the right emotional state. And I think one of the things that can happen with anxiety as an example is we do tell ourselves to calm down. We say to ourselves, this isn't a big deal, calm down, but that doesn't work. And so now we're anxious about not just that we can't calm down, but that we told ourselves to calm down and now we're failing at that also, so it really starts to spiral out of control for us. And one of the things that researchers have suggested rituals do is, because it requires us to pay attention to something, it actually it doesn't allow us to spiral as far. We literally don't have the resources to go all the way to the worst catastrophe in the world if I'm busy doing the ritual that I like to do, tying my shoes in the way that I like to tie my shoes. And so we do have this sense of they'll keep us sometimes present in the sense that it doesn't let us go way, way off task because it's bringing us to the here and now.
That reminds me of one of the reasons that I really started leaning into rituals. And in my particular life, I identified for a long time with having a very addictive personality. And it's because I did. Like, I was on copious amounts of Adderall. I had a horrible case of bulimia for a decade. I just had a lot of really destructive rituals. And I started to believe, with a lot of things, if you're not creating your life, then your life is creating you for you, is sort of what I came out to believe. And, you tend to chase other people's versions of success, of fun, of the way they want to dress. And so there was this really healing period of my life where I was really figuring out who I was, what was important to me, and creating rituals around that, so that it was almost like the replacement effect of like replacing a bad habit with a new one. And I think I really needed those to move beyond some of those just really gripping bad habits, especially bulimia. That was just one of the darkest periods of my life, because it was like I could feel when I would clip into that ritual, and then there would be no leaving, sometimes for a whole day, where I'm just cycling in and out. What did you learn about the people with those really gripping, negative, addictive type rituals? Do they need the positive ones to move out? You see it a lot, even with AA. That has its own rituals built into it. Even just attending the meeting is a ritual. I guess the question is, do you need to still have a ritual to get out of those other ones? It almost seems like you do.
Yeah, I think there's, of course, many things contribute to helping people get over addictive behavior because it's so hard to change that behavior. But for example, with smoking cessation, there's the actual smoking, but then there's the whole ritual of reaching for the pack, tapping out the cigarette, lighting the cigarette. It's very tactile, and then there's smoke. It's like a very visceral kind of ritual, regardless of what you're smoking. That what surrounds it is there, right? And so if you are accustomed to having something between your fingers and that feels calming, well, we need to replace all of those steps. Right? If I give you a nicotine patch, it's true, it's going to give you nicotine that you would get from a cigarette, but it's not doing the other things that were part of it. And so you do see there are therapies where they think about, can we replace those ritualistic behaviors with other ritualistic behaviors? So if you're reaching for your cigarettes, can we have you reach for something else instead, just to kind of redirect that impulse? And so I do think, again, the solution to addiction is not, reach for your phone instead of your cigarette or whatever. It's much more complicated. But there is this sense that part of the solution is, in fact, to try to replace some of the ritualistic behavior with a new one.
Yeah, I'm thinking about companies that have come out with, like, they look like almost a little vape, but instead they have like essential oils. I thought that was cool at one point. And then I was like, I think research now shows you shouldn't be inhaling essential oils, but to each their own. I think we want to keep it air as often as possible, but who knows? I would maybe argue if it's temporary and it's for a period of time to move from one that's going to clearly continue to get more addictive, it could be helpful. But then we also have these interesting rituals. I am the type that really does question everything. Like, we shake hands. I know you talk about that. And it wasn't until your book that I'm like, maybe I should question that one. I'm going to go for something totally different. My sister-in-law actually does do something different. She does a hug, but she wants it to be heart to heart. And I notice I always go to the other side. And so she's always like moving me to this side. Yeah. And on one hand, I'm like, I appreciate the heart to heart connection, but you do realize every time we hug, I feel a little bit jarred. And so I'm like, oh yeah, over here, I did it wrong. Make meaning about it. And so I don't know. We all have like these positive, I guess, rituals. But even then it can kind of slice into murkier waters.
For sure. Incredibly awkward if I go in for a hug and you go for the handshake, right? Now, that shouldn't really matter, but it does, because it shows that we were mismatched on how we feel about each other. So technically it's just a handshake, but there's a lot of meaning in these kinds of things when we greet other people, because we're telling each other literally how much we love each other. Because I don't go in for a hug with a stranger.
I'm just going to start going in for a light face slap. Just a tiny tap and be like,
little wake up.
Goof you. See what happens.
Even in the pandemic, when we obviously weren't shaking hands, we didn't get rid of it altogether. People would bump elbows. So we still had this impulse to greet each other in a way that was connecting. And we just said, well, let's use another part of our body until we can use the other part again. It's very interesting that those are the decisions that we make in these situations.
I was speaking at a conference when this came into play, and I just refused. I started grabbing people's elbows. Everyone thought it was very odd because suddenly their arms moving like a little chicken wing because I'm just shaking their elbow. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it is funny how we just tend to bring meaning. But then there's other situations where you mentioned that 60 to 75% of people in relationships report having a relationship ritual. So this is another area where we actually can infuse our own meaning into that. What did those rituals look like? And did you find that it actually strengthened people's connections?
I think when people think of like rituals in romantic relationships, they tend to think of either just date nights. So you got wedding anniversaries, date nights, Valentine's Day. These are kind of standard ones that we're supposed to do with the person that we love. But when we ask people, about their own relationships, they'll often come up with, they might mention those, but they have these little tiny practices that they do that are meaningful to them. I don't know why this is my favorite one, but this one person said, every time before we eat, we clink our forks together and then eat. And it's such an odd little behavior. And yet you can see it's like a really lovely thing about that couple. And we do see, if we ask couples, how satisfied are you with your relationship? We do see that couples that have things like the little fork clink are in fact more satisfied than couples who don't have those kinds of practices in their relationship.
I can see that because it's a moment of intentional connection. Like you probably, or maybe you lock eyes at that point or something. I went to this class like a decade ago with my husband, and one of my friends was leading like an intimacy and connection class, and she talked about the importance of what she called landing. And it was really like every time somebody came home, you just have this moment of connection. Like you actually give each other a hug and like say, how was your day? And it sounds so silly. Like maybe you do that naturally, but a lot of people do lose those little moments. And then you just kind of go through autopilot, and then you wonder why you don't feel appreciated or you don't really have the same connection. I was really hoping this ritual was going to be like a sports dance right before sex. I thought that would have been awesome. I need to come up with like a 83-point movement to get in the mood. But my husband and I, when the kids go to bed, we always go into our office and we sit on the couch and we talk, and we normally open a sparkling water. I'm actually seeing the ritual in this that we did not consciously craft. It's just what we don't watch TV at night. And so it's like, oh, finally I put our kids down. He ends up going up there. And so then I come up and meet him and I bring us sparkling waters and we open them, and it's our little ritual. And I love it even more after this conversation. I'm going to infuse a little, maybe I'll bring a fork just to clink and then throw it on the ground and see what happens. You talk about the 4 lessons of relationship rituals. Why are these important? Because now I'm thinking of all these ways to craft it.
I think one of I guess it's sad, but important is some couples. So we can ask both members of a couple, do you have any relationship rituals? And usually people agree. So either they both say, yes, we do, or they both say, we don't. But there's some couples where one person says, oh my God, we do. We have this wonderful thing that we do, every night when I get home from work. And the other person says, no, we don't have any rituals. And so one of the key, it's sad, but one of the key lessons is they have to be joint. They have to be created by both of you, and you both have to be invested in them. And the other thing that really shows how important that is if you break up with somebody, they're allowed to, you might not like it, but they're allowed to date other people. They're allowed to get married. They're allowed to have kids, but they may not recycle your relationship ritual. The one thing they cannot do, if you got divorced and you found out your husband was doing sparkling water in the office with somebody else, it's like, right? I mean, that's us, right? That's not, you can't use that. And that shows the power of them, really, that they become who we are. And you really have violated something so important if you just take it and use it somewhere else.
I think that's so important because I've read from different relationship coaches how you should really look at a relationship as 3 people. It's me, you, and us. And when you do that, you start to see that collective energy of togetherness. It reminds me of how Napoleon Hill talks about masterminds and how when you bring 2 people together, it's not 1 + 1. It's actually some sort of exponential amount of consciousness and ideas. And so that same thing happens when you really prioritize your relationship. There's this like extra energy around it. One of my rituals, I'm realizing all these rituals are coming to mind suddenly. Whenever I hug my husband, for some reason, I'll take off my slipper. We don't wear shoes in the house. And I put my foot on his foot. And so I tell him, I'm like, if I ever die, you're going to feel a foot on your foot sometimes and you're going to know it's me. I'm like infusing my spirit. I was like, and if you divorce me, you might still feel a foot on
exactly.
foot, and you'll know that I'm there.
It's a curse.
Good or bad. But another topic, I was just talking about blended families this morning because I was raised in a blended family. How can rituals help and why are they important?
If you look at research about blended families, one thing that stepchildren will say is, there are so many things that are painful about your parents getting divorced, but one thing is that they do lose the rituals of the family. That in my family, we used to always do this when we started dinner. And then when my parents split up, I went to this new place and we didn't do the ritual anymore. Or we had a favorite restaurant that we went to every week, and now we don't go to that anymore because it's associated with, their ex-husband or wife or whatever it might be. And kids feel that loss of that regularity and that important thing because that was part of who they are. And blended families are good at, or happy blended families are good at pulling some of those elements, keeping some of those elements and making sure that they're still there. And you see, then they also come up with their own. So they'll pull from each family and then create some new things for the new family. And it's not an easy process to figure out. It can take quite some time. But when that happens, stepchildren feel like they don't feel torn. They don't feel torn between their initial family and their new families or whatever it might be. They feel at home because these practices have been sorted out in a way that everyone feels welcome.
We should start doing this in relationships. I'll get into a new relationship and be like, my last relationship did this. Can we still have pizza nights with him? Just kidding. Uh-huh. Yeah, I could see how that would be really helpful. I didn't have memories of my parents being together because they divorced so early, but I definitely felt, I was just saying this morning to my husband, how the thing with blended families is there's a risk of it not feeling stable. And my stepbrothers would come and be with us for a week and then their mom for a week. And it just felt like we were always adjusting to them being gone or to them being back. And they were adjusting to being in a different households, different types of rules. And it was just difficult. So we had specific rituals too. Like Friday was junk food night. It was the night that we could order pizza and like watch TGIF back when TV was really good. And it did help. Like it was something that they would look forward to. So even though that was their time that they'd come back, usually that daytime period would be a little rough. And then junk food night would kind of bring us all together. Mm-hmm. There's another area where rituals you brought up we talked about it earlier about how rituals have the potential to, yes, bond groups of people, but it also has the potential to divide. And I'm sure most people out there are feeling that it does just seem like our society is more divided than ever. And there's a lot of theories around this. I think a big one that we just can't ignore is that we just have more ability to view everybody else and what everybody thinks. Like just like 15 years ago, we did not have everybody posting everything they believed on their like billboard, which is their social media profile, that then I log in to interact with people. And then I happen to see this one guy who believes something totally different from me and is saying it in a very divisive way. So when you were studying this, did you develop any theories on how to make this easier, like how to not use them for the positive rather than maybe some of their negative side effects?
One of the things that you see is that rituals are used for sure to bring people together. They're used to divide people, but we also use them to reconcile. So if you think about once the damage has been done, people will use ritual both at at a national level, like these two groups have been in conflict. But even there's cute stories about people who got a divorce and then remarry the same person later on. And so maybe they haven't learned their lesson, or maybe they've learned something about themselves, but they'll often have like a new ceremony that's a different ceremony than the original one. There was one couple that got remarried, and the invitation to their wedding said that the divorce didn't work out. So we have these funny ways of, I think, using them even when there is a fracture to kind of try to come back together also.
I don't know why, but I find it so endearing when people get back together after a divorce. Like it makes me so happy. Somebody on my husband's side of the family did that, and so did my uncle. And you could always tell he was still in love with her during that period of time. And then now they're back together, and my heart is just so warmed by it. So maybe that's the thing. Maybe I need to invite people different from me over. We can burn some shit, dig a hole, burn some things,
sparkling water,
open a sparkling water and do a little sports dance. I think that's beautiful. And so what I love to do, though, is leave listeners with one thing to really focus on to ground what we've learned, because we've covered a lot of bases here, to infuse the goodness of this topic into their life. If you're going to give them one piece of growth work, what would that be?
The worst advice, I think, imagine I said, you should meditate for 6 hours a day. That would be great, but nobody's got the time. And so I think a lot about not even so much adding, where should I add new rituals, but I think a lot about looking at your current life and kind of taking an inventory of it and seeing where it's already happening. Because when you see where they're already happening, you get a little more out of it when you recognize it. You even said about your sparkling water, with your husband, that now when you do it, it's going to feel a little something else, right? And so I think seeing your rituals and owning them and acknowledging them, that alone is already a nice place to begin to get a little bit more out of them.
Next time we talk, my sparkling water ritual is going to be like a 17-step ritual that includes a dance and an aroma. It's going to be great.
Love it.
Thank you so much for everything you brought to this topic. I personally have found such power in rituals, especially when I do consciously craft them, whether that's tweaking a long-standing one to just feel more like me, or it's something to instill a new behavior that I want to do, or it's to receive closure or a transition. They're just so powerful. So I love this topic, and thank you for devoting however long it took you to write a book, because that's a big feat. So for listeners that are really resonating with this and they want to go deeper, where's the best place for them to connect and to find your book?
Best place is just michaelnorton.com. And the interesting spot is we have a quiz. So you can take a rituals quiz and see where you are. Do you have a lot? Do you have not that many? And in different domains of life. So it gives you a little snapshot of where you are right now. And then you can think about taking your inventory and maybe doing some things differently.
All the links for this episode are at mindlove.com/344. Your challenge for this week is to just bring awareness to the rituals that you already have in your life. And by doing this, can you make them even more meaningful? Since recording this episode, those sparkling water nights mean more to me than I ever thought that they would. It's so interesting. There's so many sensory moments in it. It's going to the fridge, grabbing the sparkling water, walking up the stairs to the office, that of the opening of the can. It's so funny how much that can just infuse each night with a little bit more meaning and memorability. I am loving it. And that's just one piece of awareness. To be honest, I didn't realize that I could have more self-awareness in my life. But every day I am blown wide open about just how much more I can bring attention to, and how this sense of awareness can transform areas of your life in such different ways. Like here, it's just about that noticing, the creation of it, the connection within it. And it's just like a gratitude practice, where when you start to bring attention to the things that you are grateful for, you start to see more of it in your life. Well, that same thing's happening with these little rituals. And that's not even talking about the ones that I consciously have crafted to create a habit, or to feel a shift, or to find flow or intention. So bonus points for this week. I would love for you to take a photo or a video or a caption or something of one of your rituals that you're bringing more awareness to this week, and tag Mind to Love Melissa. I want to share everybody's rituals. I think this will be super fun. So do that today if you can. I also want to share with you, I have a Mind Love retreat coming up. I cannot tell you how many people have requested a retreat and how much intention I am putting into this. I am pulling out all the stops. So if you want to join Mind Love's inaugural retreat, I'm getting the page up very soon. It might be up already now that this is live. We'll see. Reach out to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa and ask about it. If you feel this calling, I want you with me this week. So reach out to me, Mind Love Melissa. I'll give you all of the details. It's going to be epic. Organic luxury chef in a beautiful mansion in the Big Bear Mountains. We're going to have a cacao ceremony. We're going to do forest coaching. It is going to be truly transformative in the best possible setting imaginable. So reach out to me on Instagram at Mind Love Melissa. And that's all for today. Thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.
In the time it takes you to actually board a flight from Group 8,
Now boarding Premier Altitude Elite Club members.
you could have bought a Hyundai on Amazon. Visit HyundaiUSA.com or call 562-314-4603 for more details. Limited availability, pickup through participating Hyundai dealer in select markets.